Welcome to the Reducing Insurance Journal, Relationship Driven Practice Edition. This is a weekly e-journal brought directly to your inbox. To subscribe, visit ridjournal.com. In today's issue, we are going to explore the topic, Do First Impressions Matter with New Patients? Do First Impressions Matter with New Patients? You can also listen to us as a podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcast tool. If you like videos, subscribe to our YouTube channel, RID Journal. I am Naren Arul Raja, your host for today's edition. Let's dive in. My guest today is my good friend, Benjamin Tuine. Hi, Ben. How are you?
Hey, Naren. Great to be with you again.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun topic. Do first impressions matter with new patients? Let me jump right in. How important is customer service in dentistry? Does it matter?
You know, that's a very good question. This is my take on it. When you're dealing with human beings, no matter what the business is, the first impressions do matter. For those of you that are married, think about, years ago when you were in the dating game, basically, right? The first impressions matter. The types of relationships that you build with people, they matter in a big way. And it's interesting that when you look at the evolution of dentistry, right? And dentistry, at least the profession as we know it today, hasn't been around for a very long time, right? For instance, when you look back in the 1960s and 60s and 70s, you look at the data, right? The number of dentists that were out there compared to the number of active patients and the number of insurance plans that existed back then that were active. And the common theme, Naren, that you see among older dentists that used to practice in those days is that it's the old saying, right? You put up the shingles and then the patients come in. And it was very taboo back then for doctors to do any kind of marketing, right? Even up until the 90s, doctors that engaged in marketing were frowned upon by their colleagues, right? Because it wasn't part of the culture at that time. But in this day and age, when you have per capita, at least compared to years past, there are a lot of dentists. There are a lot of general dentists. There are a lot of specialists compared to before, to where patients now have options, right? And not only that, marketing in dentistry is considered the norm, right? As it should be, as it should have been in the past, to where in this day and age, if you're not kind to people, if you're not nice, if you're not building relationships, a lot of times patients won't be loyal to you, right? Where they're just going to shop around, just like we do with groceries, right? We can go to a number of different grocery stores, and if somebody ticks you off at one grocery store, you won't go back. I mean, I have personal experience with that. I'm sure everybody does too, in terms of having a variety of different options, to where, especially in dentistry, the human relationship, the connectivity with that person, it matters so much more today than it has ever been. In the course of dentistry, when we're speaking about just the last 20 to 30 years alone, right? So yeah, it absolutely does matter if you're looking at building a patient base where patients stay.
Absolutely, Ben. That's really good advice. What about the phone? Do you think patients screen practices based on how that phone call goes?
Yeah, I think so. I think, when it comes to dentistry, there's a great deal of anxiety, right? Where a lot of times when people are calling, it's because they have a problem, right? They have some pain point. So when you're dealing with people that have anxiety naturally, right, when they're calling and shopping around for a dental practice, I think how you handle people over the phone is critical in an effort to not only schedule them, set the right expectations, but build relationships with those people. And it all starts with that initial interaction, right? I remember a couple of years ago, and not to gross out any of the listeners, but I've had this trouble with an ingrown toenail, and I played football with it for a number of years, and it was just so painful after every practice, after every game. And finally, 15 years later, I decided, my wife is begging me, you got to go and see a podiatrist to get this problem taken care of. So what did I do? I made a list of podiatrists near me. I Googled, right? And I just skimmed off the top 5 and I started calling. First practice didn't pick up. Second practice picked up, but they weren't very nice. Third practice, they weren't very nice either. Fourth practice was booked out 6 months. And then the fifth practice when I called, and here's a common theme among those that actually picked up, is they didn't ask for my name. You know, I said, hey, I'm calling to see if I can schedule an appointment. First question they asked me was, what insurance do I have, right?
Right.
And I thought that was very interesting because, like, you know, I don't know if podiatry is different than general dentistry, but you'd think that in these subsets of medicine, right, these different specialties within medicine, that people would handle the phones the way good practices in dentistry do, right? Which is a good practice in dentistry. Somebody calls in, they're going to ask a question, but I always counter and say, hey, you know, I'm going to get your question here in just a second, but who do I have the pleasure of chatting with, right? You make
Right.
it personal for those patients, you know, in an effort for them to kind of feel that connection from the very beginning and have a good impression with you. And I kind of feel like, so this podiatry practice, I went there and I got the surgery done, but there was no interaction with me personally, right? There's no human connectedness. And no surprise, when I went in, I was the only patient. It wasn't a very busy practice, right? And so interestingly, you know, when I look at that experience and think, you know, here comes the coach's hat, you know, putting on the coach's hat, and I so badly want to say, hey, look, you could probably convert a lot more of these calls because you're the fifth person that I called. And the other ones weren't very nice, but the fact you answered the phone exactly the same way they did. And who knows how many people you lose from that, right? Is that initial first impression is so critical, not only getting a patient, but getting a patient to stay long-term, in my opinion.
Absolutely. We listen to calls, and I'll give you a stat. The average dental practice only books 1/3 of new patient callers. 1/3. I mean, that means 2/3 of the new patients, they're calling, but nothing happens after that call, meaning they're not showing up, they're not booking an appointment. So like you said, the simple thing like finding out the patient's name and using that to make it personal, most people don't do it. I mean, that's just like 101. That's like the starting point. Majority of practices don't do it, even in dentistry, unfortunately. And then, of course, they don't even know what their conversion rate is. Like if I go and ask a owner of a practice, a dentist, hey, what percentage of your calls are you booking into new patient appointments? He's like, I don't know. It's great, but I don't know what the number is. But the problem is, you know, if you don't know what the number is, you can't improve it. Your team can't improve it. It's like, you know, tell your kids as they go through school, you never get any grades. You don't get, you know, right and wrong. We won't score your exams. You just somehow you're going to do fine. It's not going to work. They need to know what they're getting a good mark on, what their score is, what their, you know, is it a right or wrong, right?
Yep.
Then they can, okay, I got this wrong. Let me see why I got this wrong. Oh, I made a careless mistake. Oh, I need to beef up on this part of algebra because that seems to be like tough for me and I don't get it. Oh, I don't understand it. So maybe can you explain it to me, right?
Yeah.
So unfortunately in dentistry, we pretend like everything we learned in how education system works, how people improve and grow, not just in dentistry, but all of healthcare, that it doesn't apply here. And then practices are like consistently bad. You know, I hate, you know, it's not consistently good. So anyway, so your tips are really valuable, Ben.
Absolutely.
What are some things you see dentists do to elevate their relationships with their patients?
You know, there's this really good book that I love reading. I think I picked it up about 10, 15 years ago called Networking with Millionaires and Their Friends. And it was actually recommended to me by a dentist that I was working with in Arizona. He said, Ben, you know, I don't know if you deal with the front office quite a bit, but I'm noticing that there's a lack of customer service. Here I am running the entire insurance department, right? So I'm running the department that deals with 95% of our patients. And he's like, if you can get this to some of the office managers to read it, and apply just a fraction of the customer service techniques in here, I think we'll do better at patient retention and getting these patients to schedule, right, as you mentioned. And one of the things that this doctor did is he was so personable with his patients, but of course it can't be personal unless those patients actually come in. If the front office, you know, buttoned up that customer service to build the proper expectations and, you know, the wow factor from the very beginning so that the patients can see this awesome doctor. This doctor even went to the extent of writing notes in the practice management system about small things, conversations, names of dogs, names of siblings or something important, birthdays, you know. And a lot of these patients would come to this doctor on personal matters all the time. I remember this doctor would write letters of recommendations for his patients that were going to college, right? He took the level of customer service to such a high level where, of course, this doctor was not participating with any dental plan. Everybody else was, every other doctor in this group was, but this doctor was entirely fee for service, mainly because, and this is my opinion and how I interacted with him, is people loved him because he was not only a doctor to them, but they viewed him as a friend, right? So imagine the amount of Christmas cards he got during Christmas. The stack was so high that I'm sure he got to all of them, but it's almost like having a Santa Claus as a dentist, right? Where the kids are sending thank you notes.
Right.
Just a stack of them. It's like, holy smokes, this guy is loved and he's beloved among his patients. And I know that's probably the extreme that you can go to, reach that high, but even if you do a fraction of that, where patients look to you and they respect you, right? And they like you, and doing those things like letters of recommendations and small things like remembering a previous conversation that you had with them, making that personal touch important to them, I think is so huge in people trusting you, right? That beyond dentistry, this is a really, really great person that cares about me truly, right?
What are some simple human interaction tips you think are helpful in building long-term relationships with patients?
I think we covered one of the important ones that you mentioned too, Naren, is you want to call the person by name, especially in the world of email, right? When we're writing to people, and to me, it's not just customers or not just patients, right? It's everybody that we deal with. When I open an email, I always open with their name, right? And I mention their name multiple times throughout that email conversation, because I do the same thing when I'm in person with somebody and talking to them over the phone or face to face. I think the human tip, with regards to a person's name, we take great pride in our names, right? Many people even look up their names and they look at the definitions behind their name, and they live a life to elevate their name to a status that they could be proud of, right? Or a legacy to make their children or their grandchildren or their friends proud that I know Naren. Naren is such a great guy, right? So the name is a point of pride for most people that I believe that we often overlook, right? Where oftentimes when we're communicating with people, we fail to mention their name multiple times in a conversation. And just to kind of talk on that one tip there, I think it's huge for us to make things personal by addressing people by a name that means the world to them, right? And if you do that, what I found in my personal life is that that's a great way to build loyalty and trust with somebody that you're talking with. Likability, right? Where they like you back because you respect their name and who they are.
100%. And another book I would recommend is How to Win Friends and Influence People by
Love
Dale
that.
Carnegie. It's a classic, right? I think it's like the book on relationships. At least it's like written, I think, almost 100 years ago, 90 years ago, and
Yeah.
it's as meaningful today as it was when the date was written.
Right.
Thank you so much, Ben. This is a wonderful episode. I of course, I always learn every time I talk to you. So really appreciate all your experience comes from not, sitting in a classroom, but literally, trial and error, like trying things and
School of Hard Knocks on the street.
Exactly. So it's really powerful because you're not going to share anything that doesn't work. So thank you for that, Ben.
Thank you, Naren.
If you love what we do here at ridjournal.com, tell your friends, share a review on iTunes or YouTube, and don't forget to subscribe. Till we meet again, I'm your host, Naren Arulraja.